Hi guys, in this video I want to think through the costs of living ethically. Not just the financial costs, but also the costs to you as a person, to your well-being, and to your sense of making the best of the life that you've got. I want to think this through in a philosophical way. I obviously don't want to suggest as a response that we just don't act ethically, we don't live ethically. Almost by definition we should act ethically, but I think I'm going to suggest that thinking through these issues, acknowledging the costs of acting ethically, can actually help with some of those costs. So obviously this is a video for those of you out there who are trying to live ethical lives, for you who are trying to act ethically. If you're not the kind of person who's interested in acting and living ethically, well, maybe this isn't the video for you, but there's plenty of other stuff on YouTube that is. Okay, so in outline, the general issue is going to go like this. Suppose you acknowledge that there is this kind of issue, this problem in the world, and there is some way that you can act to alleviate or partly alleviate that problem. But you acknowledge that in doing that, in trying to do that, there's going to be some kind of cost involved. You're going to have to do something. The classic case is you're going to be donating to some charity that's going to do the stuff, so there would be a financial cost there. Or maybe you would have to do the stuff itself or refrain from doing the stuff, and that is going to impose some other kind of cost on you, to the way you live your life, or to your family, or to your sense of self, your well-being, or whatever. And that's going to place an ethical burden on you, right? Because you acknowledge that there is this action that is the right thing to do, but you also acknowledge that it's going to have this cost for you. And in a lot of these kind of cases, I'm going to talk about some practical examples in a moment, but in a lot of these cases, there is going to be this trade-off between the right thing to do, ethically speaking, and the kind of cost that is placing on you. What should you do about that? And I'm not just going to be thinking here about how we practically decide how to trade those off, like should I do the ethical thing or do the thing that's good for me or whatever. I'm more thinking about if we do decide to live that ethical life, to make those ethical choices, but this burden kind of sits on us and it builds up, how can we deal with that? How can we still live full and flourishing lives? Before we go any further, I just want to jump in here and say, if you're enjoying this content and you want to help me out by supporting the channel, go and take a look at my Ko-Fi page, see what we've got there, and see ways in which you can help me out. Okay, so let me discuss one practical case that I think makes this a bit more vivid. So the issue of flying. Okay, let's start with the broader issue of travel. Travel, I take it, is just obviously a good thing in our lives. You know, sometimes you just need to get away from it all. You need to go abroad and lie on a hot beach and relax. That's just good for your well-being, for your mental health, for your physical health, or whatever. But you know, travel goes well beyond just having a nice holiday, right? Travel really does expand your mind, your worldview, your sense of self even. Experiencing other cultures, other places where stuff is done differently, that gives you a real sense of, well, alternative ways of doing stuff, alternative societies. It gives you a good sense of people who value things differently, who think differently, and it can help you be more open-minded, more empathetic, more caring. But oftentimes, in order to travel to the most interesting places, you've just got to fly. I mean, that's the way the modern world is set up, right? To get to a lot of places, you have to fly there. And obviously flying has this huge environmental cost. The carbon cost of flying, particularly long-haul flying, but pretty much any flight, is really, really high. You can be a good climate citizen for years. You can give up the car, walk to work, cycle to work. You can insulate your house, turn down the heating. You can do all this stuff for years and years and years. And one flight, in terms of carbon budget, will just knock all that good work out in, you know, couple of hours. So, you know, looking at the environmental costs of flying and balancing this stuff up, it looks like oftentimes the ethical thing to do, particularly when you're thinking not just about, you know, being a good citizen towards other citizens in the world now, but also to future people, to future citizens, those generations that are going to suffer the worst impacts of climate change, of climate disaster. Oftentimes the only ethical decision is not to take that flight. But in deciding not to fly, maybe as a one-off or maybe, for good, like I am just not going to fly anymore, there is this cost on your own life, right? You are going to shut out those opportunities for travel, or at least a lot of them. And that can be quite a burden. So in my own case, I decided back in 2018, well, I'm not sure exactly what I decided, but I kind of thought I just don't want to fly anymore. Like it really got to me, the environmental, the carbon cost of flying and the way the world was changing, environmentally, the way we were heading. I just thought, I just don't want to contribute towards that anymore in the way that I have been. I had been flying once or twice a year, for work, to visit conferences. And I thought, I just don't want to do that anymore. So I said, I'm not going to fly anymore. I don't know if I meant forever or for a bit or whatever. I'm not really sure. I didn't fly up until 2023. And that felt really good, but it was hard. So I still wanted to contribute to academia around the world. I did a lot of talks by Skype, by Zoom. That felt good in some ways. It meant I could attend a lot of things that I wouldn't have been able to get to otherwise. But, you miss out on a lot. Like I didn't really get to know those people. You do your talk, you have a quick Zoom Q&A, then it's done. It's not the same as being there. You don't get to go to the pub, the bar afterwards and really get to chat to people, get to know people. That's how I've made academic friends all around the world. Not on Zoom, but by being in the same place with them. I think, I was missing out on all of that. I did travel to conferences abroad, but by train. So I'd get the Eurostar, I'd get the train across the continent. That can be a really great experience, traveling through Italy or through Switzerland. They've got really great train networks. So that was a good experience, but it takes a long time. So rather than being able to get somewhere like Italy in half a day, it would take, 2 days. So I'd travel all day from Nottingham, stay overnight in France or Switzerland or whatever, and then move on. It's quite expensive because you've got to kind of, you eat through the day, trains are a bit more expensive, you've got to stay overnight. I was spending more time away from my family to get to these places. So, there was a whole bunch of costs in doing that. And doing that kind of year on year, it felt like it was building up like, I want to do the right thing, but it's kind of getting harder and harder. It's costing more, it's taking more time. So I did fly in 2023 for a family holiday. So I hadn't taken my daughter. She's 4 now. She'd never been abroad. And I kind of figured I really want to show her more of the world than just what we have here in the UK. And I can't really subject her to a 2-day train ride with a bit of holiday and then another 2-day train ride. I mean, she's struggling with a 2-hour train ride. So, reflecting on that philosophically, it feels like I'm putting the kind of needs of my family, a small bunch of people, over the needs of all of those future generations who are going to suffer from climate change. Doesn't feel very ethical, but, I did that, and I think that's kind of what most people would do. I guess a lot of people are going to say it comes down to balance. Yeah, I mean, everything comes down to balance, but how is it that we balance up the needs of an awful lot of people, in the future, let's say, versus like 3 people in my family? Doesn't feel like a very good balance ethically. And I think in this sort of case, there might not be much you can say philosophically other than acknowledging that acting ethically is hard. And sometimes you can't do it. Sometimes you can't do the best action, or you're not willing to do the best action. So I'll say a bit more about that in a little bit. But first, I want to talk about another practical example, okay? The example of workers going on strike. In the UK in 2022 and 2023, you've got train drivers, train workers, doctors, nurses, teachers, head teachers, civil servants, as well as academics going on strike. It really affects us in academia. We've been on strike on and off since 2018. So this is a really big issue for an awful lot of people. In the UK, it's a huge issue for academics. Now, I don't want to talk too much about the rights or wrongs of striking. Okay, should you or shouldn't you strike? That's not my focus here. What I want to talk about is the balancing up of the ethical issues in favour of striking. Often it is the right thing to do, the ethical thing to do, versus the costs to you personally and professionally. So just to get my cards out on the table, I go on strike when a strike's called by my union, UCU. I think it's nearly always the right thing to do, morally speaking. Often when I'm going on strike, it's not primarily to benefit me. So in the recent round of academic strikes, issues have involved things like pay gaps, like the gender pay gap, the disability pay gap, casualization and workload. Now, not all of those issues affect me directly and personally. Pay gaps, gender pay gaps, disability pay gaps don't relate to me. I'm not in the disadvantaged group, so that's not something that I would help to alleviate in my own case. Casualization, I'm not on a casual contract, so I haven't got something directly to benefit from, the advances of going on strike, okay? It's not to benefit me, it's to benefit those who are harder up in academia. I still think it's the right thing to do and I still go on strike. But there's a huge personal cost to me and to all academics who go on strike, right? Because you don't get paid. I think it's cost me something like £6,000 to go on strike over the last couple of years. I don't really have that kind of money just to kind of chuck away or give away on a whim or whatever. So it's been really financially costly. And I think the costs of going on strike aren't purely financial. By going on strike, you really heighten up all the problems in your own mind. I feel a lot worse about my job, about my profession, about my future when striking and the issues that strikes are about come to the fore. I'm much happier in my job when strikes aren't going on. Not because the job's any better then, it's exactly the same, but it's the fact of going on strike kind of heightens all these issues. It brings them to salience and kind of makes you feel much worse about things. I would definitely have a much nicer time, a much nicer job, a much nicer time in general if I just ignored the strikes. I would be better off psychologically and financially for sure, right? If I just kind of ignored all of this stuff, but I do it, I engage with it because I think it's the right thing to do. If there was a tablet that you could take that made you kind of forget about this stuff or change your priorities or whatever, I think if I had the tablet, I would be better off, but I wouldn't choose to take that tablet even though it would make me feel better off because I think it's the wrong thing to do. Okay, so what's the solution to all this? What is the solution when you have acknowledged that there is a right way to act, but it's a very difficult way to act in some cases, and it's going to bring a real cost to you, financially, psychologically, to your well-being or whatever? Well, there may be no solution, right? We just sometimes have to acknowledge that life is hard, that decision-making is hard, and going through the consequences of making a tough decision. If you've said, this is the right thing to do, even though there's going to be a cost, you just have to do that and you have to live with that. There may be no resolution to that. You just have to, as it were, live with those consequences, live with life being hard sometimes. But having said that, it's really tough living with this sense of kind of victimhood or, I try to be good and it's costing me so much. You can't think in those terms. You have to do the good stuff because it's good, but you can't let all of that stuff overwhelm you. So how do you avoid that? Well, one way you can try to do that, and one suggestion I've got, is just take the easy wins where they're available, okay? So sometimes, taking the ethical option just doesn't involve much in the way of cost. So just do all of those, okay? So some examples of that would be switch out your milk, right? If you drink cow's milk, just switch it for oat milk, let's say. It's just as good, but ethically speaking, in terms of, animal cruelty, in terms of carbon impact, etc., it's just so much better. So a big ethical win, but really no cost to you. You can cycle or walk to work, right? Either give up the car or just leave it parked there. You'll get fitter, you'll feel better about yourself, you're doing this thing that is good for the environment, and the cost to you, there really isn't that much. And generally speaking, just be nice to people around you. Like, that doesn't really cost you anything, but it kind of improves other people's well-being and your own. It's an easy win. So if there are these easy wins, just take them where they're available. And I think that is some way of balancing out the costs of doing the hard stuff. We can also acknowledge that it's not just about personal actions, right? So there's an awful lot that, the government and big business can do. So what we can try and do as individuals is to support good policies by, talking them up, by voting for them or whatever. So here's an example of that, going back to the case of flying. So suppose you've got a whole bunch of people who have decided to give up flying, and that's the good thing to do, but it's kind of making them pretty miserable, and you've got one person who just flies loads. I think it would be better if that averaged out so that there was no more flying overall, but those kind of the goodness of those flights in the travel involved got spread out amongst those people. So one kind of policy you might want to support is one that sort of says everybody gets, one tax-free flight a year. And after that, the cost, the tax cost goes up by loads. So basically you're encouraging people to take just one flight, at most one flight every year. So you get the benefit of travel each year, but you kind of avoid these people, business travelers or frequent flyers or whatever, who kind of hog all of that climate resource. It doesn't really benefit them that much. It's much better to spread out the benefit amongst as many people as possible without ramping up the carbon cost. A third way of dealing with these kind of burdens is to be around like-minded people. Okay, so if you're the only person that you know who's decided to go on strike or to give up flying or whatever, it's quite hard to do that alone. If everyone you know is, flying away to sunny places and having a great time, and you're left stuck at home because you said, I'm going to be ethical, I'm not going to fly, or, you're the only one who's gone on strike and all of your colleagues are kind of, well, they're still getting paid, but if you win the strike, they also get the benefits. That can feel really bad. Like, you can feel like a real mug, right? Contrast that with a case where all your friends are like-minded. They don't want to fly either, or they don't want to fly as much. So you support each other in that, and maybe you just choose to do some fun stuff together. Contrast that with the case where, most of your colleagues decide to go on strike together. You have a really great time together. You don't feel like you're the odd one out. So being around like-minded people can be a really good way of dealing with the kind of, the burdens of taking some of these ethical actions. And the fourth suggestion I've got is, we just have to acknowledge that sometimes these things are hard. Like I said before, living a good life, it's not meant to be easy. Making hard decisions and going through the consequences of that, it's not an easy thing to do. Acknowledging that doesn't stop them from being hard. It doesn't solve the issue, but the mere fact that we're saying, yeah, in doing this, I want to do this, but I know it's going to be hard. I acknowledge it's going to be hard. The mere acknowledgement of that does help. I would love to know what you think about these issues. Leave me a comment down below. Thank you so much to my Ko-Fi supporters for making this content possible. Thanks to you for watching this far. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you guys back here soon.